Hi, everybody. You might notice my background's not the same. I'm at a beautiful property in Arrowhead with people I love who are in the presidency of the Movement of Spiritual Inner Awareness. I'm Jeffrey Morgan. Today is Saturday, October 19th, and this is the Hawk Talk I host twice a week to discuss my experiences on the path of soul transcendence. I offer this work with the encouragement and support of my friend John Morton, who holds the mystical traveler consciousness, which is a spiritual consciousness that allows us to do the work that we're doing here today. If you're new to the call, the format is simple. We're going to start by calling ourselves forward into the light, which is calling our awareness forward into the light of God that's already present. And then we're going to chant three Anai hues. Hue is an ancient name for God, and Anai invokes a quality of empathy and compassion. And then I'm going to play a video clip from my teacher, John Roger. And that was actually picked by my friend Vincent Dupont. And then I'm going to read the lyrics of a beautiful song called The Wichita Lineman, which was picked by my friend Paul Kay, and has deep esoteric meaning underneath seemingly simple lyrics, which I think is the best kind of poetry. And then we can talk about whatever you would like. So with that, Ron Holnick, aging Ron Holnick, will you call us forward into the light, my brother?
Okay. No, I'm good. All right. Lord God of all creation, we come before you this morning with great joy in our hearts, stemming from the awareness, Lord, that thy will is done and everything is unfolding according to your preferences. We ask for the awareness that we are all in that loving all the time, and our job is nothing more than becoming aware of that. And for this time together, Lord, we give our thanks. So be it.
When I do my SCs, is that for me to become spiritually free, or am I already spiritually free?
Okay, you are already spiritually free, you don't know it. And to do SCs is so you get to know that you are spiritually free.
Okay.
Spiritual exercises are a specific thing for you as an individual to know and validate the working of the traveler with you in the spirit world. But if you don't know, the work still goes on anyway.
Will I know?
I don't know what people will know. The opportunity will be there for you to know, and if you haven't prepared yourself to know, it's like saying, will I pass the bar exam? The law bar exam, and I say, I don't know, have you studied for it? You say no, and I say unlikely, and you say, yeah, I've taken 4 years of law school, I've taken 3 practice exams, I passed it at 98%. I'll say, good chance you'll just haul right through it. SEs is preparing for the exam to see if you wake up to it. But it's not a test.
So if I don't know, I won't flunk.
There's no flunking on this. It's just a playback. It's like giving you a spelling quiz to see which words you don't know. Then you don't have to study what you know. You just study what you don't know. And you get to find out what you don't know, so you focus on it. It's a statement of awareness. It's a whole different way of looking at things. So we're not looking at failure, we're looking at progression.
Okay.
If you look forward to failure, what you behold, you can become. So you'll become a failure. So we look forward to success. And if you behold success, you can have it.
All right. So this is Wichita Lineman by Glenn Campbell. And I would invite you, if you're around, go have some tea with Paul Kay and ask him what this means to him. He started to explain it to me, and it's a beautiful the song for him, I think, invokes the experience of being with John Roger and the work that John Roger did for us and does for us. And really what the mystical traveler is doing for all of us all the time, constantly chanting us into greater awareness of who we truly are. So here are the lyrics. I am a lineman for the county and I drive the main road, searching in the sun for another overload. I hear you singing in the wire. I can hear you through the wine, and the Wichita lineman is still on the line. You know I need a small vacation, but it don't look like rain. And if it snows, that stretch down south won't ever stand the strain. And I need you more than I want you, and I want you for all time. And the Wichita lineman is still on the line. And I need you more than I want you, and I want you for all time. And the Wichita lineman is still on the line. All right. What would y'all like to talk about? Evan McGinn.
Hi, Jeffrey.
All right.
Um, what I would like to hear from you is, for me, it seems like you're somebody who's kind of jumped off the cliff, and to have the traveler take you fully. And I just would like to maybe hear what you have to say about that, if that is even what's happened.
Well, we're all the traveler. That's my experience. And there's nothing to take in the sense that we are that. But I think there's a way that we can become more aware of all of us being the mystical traveler. So the irony of my experience in terms of spiritual inner awareness is I think when I was young, it was a lot about doing and about emulating. And I would read things Jared would say, and then I would just sort of repeat them. And I would get real complex with that. And then there was a point at which I took a very simple approach, and it became less about becoming and more about just knowing. And then it was like, what are the blocks I place between my conscious presence right now and the knowing that I'm divine? And I think that excellence in spirituality might just be something like removing all the extra steps I place between me and that knowing and that infinity. And I realized that all these years I had been doing my spiritual exercises, thinking that I was doing them when they were really doing me. And that
What floor is it on? I'll be back there.
this personality level that I have going is this thing that actually takes a lot of energy to maintain. And that the time that I spend in spiritual exercises, the time I spend even just being in my loving and my presence with people is actually like yawning. It's like unfettering myself, like taking a very heavy pack off my back and finally sitting down and breathing.
Hmm.
The mind for me is always a place where I have to be the hero of my own story and defend my position. And it's a place where I am can't be fully what's available. I have to have a journey or a becoming. I have to do something other than just be. And so there's a process by which we challenge the mind and challenge the story, especially the story of a traveler outside of us rather than an inner master within us. And when we challenge that story, we start to feel all of that flood our consciousness. And it's not so much that you make it happen through that process, it's more like you remove the debris of a river of infinite consciousness. And when the debris is cleared, of course the river will flow because it was always there.
Hmm.
It's just I put the debris in there.
Hmm.
And as much as we pursue God, we are pursued by that same consciousness. And as much as we reach for it, it's reaching further. And as much as we think we're chanting into it, it's chanting us more than we're chanting it.
Hmm.
And and so to a large extent, it's not that I'm competent to do anything for God or do anything toward God. It's the degree to which I'm willing to allow God to do through me and for me and to get out of the way of that process. And it sounds like a discipline, like, oh, I've got to stop myself from doing stuff. But really, it's more about pulling the energy back into the spiritual center and focusing in that third eye center and yearning and reaching for that we truly are, that calls us by name all the time.
Hmm.
And it's nothing that we need to make happen. And thank God, because I would probably be quite incompetent to make it happen. And I'm grateful that there's a higher intelligence in spirit that knows how to breathe me and knows how this process works. So for me, I just work on those bad habits. And I don't know about that other part. I know that the mystical traveler is alive in me, in you, and that there's no difference between us, that there's no separation. So if you see in me a mystical traveler consciousness expressing, you're seeing your own mystical traveler consciousness expressing. And I would be wary of the mind that takes you outside of yourself and gives any kind of power or authority to anybody but yourself. But not the self with a lowercase s, because we give authority to that one all the time. But give authority to the uppercase S inside of you, the one that is truly behind your eyes and behind your perception, the one that perceives you perceiving and knows all. And yet, in the way that we talk about Jesus Christ adventing himself into the physical expression of Jesus, the Christ expressing through that seemingly limited physical expression. we as humans do that. The soul allows itself to express through a lower, denser expression so that we can have this experience. And so there's also an invitation not to judge or have againstness toward the messiness of this level. If anything, for me, there's an invitation to have joy and have it more abundantly, and to even enjoy the messiness of this level, to enjoy the arguments, to enjoy the laughing. I mean, I'm having a lot of that experience up here, playing games and arguing about important topics and laughing and cooking and eating nice food. Yeah, okay. Soul transcendence, highfalutin this, but you know what? When love is present, God is present.
Hmm.
He who dwells in love dwells in God and God in him. And so, in the messiness of the physical expression, we can also find God there to the extent that we claim the God that we are and that we allow that to infuse our experience.
Hmm.
And that's my experience anyway.
Thank you.
God bless you.
I am. Sure.
Okay. Is that Lelania or Richard? I can't hear you. Is that a me issue or a you issue?
Can you hear me now?
I hear you faintly, but good enough.
Good enough. Okay. Um, Last night I had an experience of deep fear, and it just showed up. And what I did was what we have been taught is to observe it, try not to get caught in any drama around it or define it. And it stayed with me for quite a while. And this morning I was thinking about something that Bear had talked about, and I can't remember the name, but it was talking about talons ripping away anything that you are hanging on to.
The terror of God. Yeah.
Terrified. It felt a lot like the fear of God, although it helped.
Did you have a question or a sharing?
Jeffrey, we can't hear him at all.
I don't know if you could turn up your mic at all, Richard. Sorry about that.
Not mine. Anything that you want to talk about around the terror of God, around going through any of that. I don't know if that helps you.
Well, how about I talk about it indirectly? Because that's a kind of that's just something you might want to talk about more on an intimate level because it's a my experience level with it, and it really depends on the individual consciousness, or actually, it really depends on, let's say, the frequency or angle by which you approach it. So some people would experience it as talons, and other people might experience it as ecstasy, and it kind of depends on your level of attachment. Since since I'm not always the brightest and have spent a long time entangling myself in various ways on various levels, it was more like the talons for me. But let's talk about the fear response in the consciousness, because I think that's very relevant for a lot of folks. So I would say, label discomfort generally in groups, and we focus particularly on the symptom. So like your heart beating fast, you're shaking, and then we decide that that's fear. I've never really found value in the labels, and oftentimes the labels carry with them a story. And usually that story is visualizations, like when you just said fear or death. Well, there's an important question with that called whose death? Is it death of the body, or is it death of the individuated you-ness? Yeah, see, that's very scary, especially if there's a mechanism set up that wants you to experience individually. So for me, throughout my spiritual experiences process in this lifetime, there have been what often happens, and this is applicable whether you're on your first discourse or on, sats and all the other stuff. We're not working with the traveler in order to feel comfortable. I mean, feeling comfortable is kind of what got us in this cycle of transmigration. We got really comfortable with that and kept going back in and back in. So oftentimes, and there's a wonderful seminar called The Fabrication of Existence, um, by John Roger, where he kind of says it pretty plainly at the beginning that the traveler is kind of here to shake you in your certainty and all of that good stuff. And he goes through all these statements. What I experience it as is the spirit is always turning up the volume when we're available to it. So if we're willing to step more fully into knowing who we truly are and really becoming commutators of that light and that spirit that comes through, I'm sure a lot of people on this call relate to that process of gradually the volume just gets turned up, gets turned up, gets turned up. Now, what that means is our limit one day becomes our baseline another day. And what that also means is we start to reveal more subtle and subtle levels of attachment to who we're not. So, at a very basic level, you might be working a lot of karma on the astral level or something at the beginning or even at the end, right? And what'll happen is this you'll start to get glimpses of the soul as an expression, and it will bump up against your idea of who you are and the imagination of who you are and the fantasy of that. And so it starts to bump up against the limitations that we create in the ego and the mind and all the other levels of consciousness where we accumulate karma. The suffering is not an inherent or required part, but my experience is the suffering is always at the level of our attachment. And the tricky part is we can have a very conscious intention not to be attached and say, oh, no, 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 I want God. I don't want all this other stuff. But there's so many subconscious levels on the various levels of our consciousness that have different intentions. And that's why it's very good to have a mystical traveler in our corner that helps us work those levels simultaneously and churn those karmas more rapidly. But it becomes more subtle and subtle and subtle. And at each layer of ego identity, we start to release more and more attachments. It's not a destruction of the ego or destruction of anything. If anything, it's just a releasing of the entrapment of that or releasing of the attachment of that. And it's it's not as if the goal is to destroy the ego and become a vegetable. For me, the goal in many ways is how do I cooperate and accept and participate in this life with excellence, with impeccability, with completeness, called the 10% level, while at the same time having this simultaneous knowing that I'm also walking with the Christ. I'm also walking with the Lord. I'm also fully spirit, fully God, and I can fully be expressing on this level. And there's a temptation when we enter into those spiritual consciousnesses to go, well, maybe I'm above this and that on the physical level. And then you go to a crowded intersection and try to cross without a crosswalk. And then you find that there's a lot of impact in this level. So there's a way in which we maintain the practicality, engagement, participation, and we also simultaneously walk fully in the knowing that we're God. And then every day we go into the spiritual exercises and experience this process of crossing into spirit like death. And yet we come back in every day and participate with loving and service in the things that we do in the physical. The beauty of the spiritual process and working with who we work with is that that process is going to happen regardless of our awareness of that or our understanding. And there's a way in which, it almost feels like you're a ping pong ball, like you're just helpless to all of this because all this stuff is going to happen. And you wake up one day and you're like, and you don't know what it is. And the mind hates that because the mind at least wants to understand suffering. I mean, if you don't have a reference point for that, I mean, if you read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, it is just really powerful to see purpose in your suffering. But so for me, I always default to the purpose of this is not a torment, this is not a suffering, this is a revelatory process by which I continuously remember more of who I truly am until I recognize that there's no I in the equation, there's just beingness. And nothing really moves or changes. What happens is the concentration of our perception. It's like salt in an infinite ocean of love and mercy. The concentration of salt moves from one place to another place, but has the ocean really moved? Well, no. It's just a part of your consciousness is referencing now from a different place. And the more I dive into that ocean of love and mercy in my own experience, the more I realize I never left it. And for my part, I think it's very much about cooperating. So if you go through something like the terror of God and have a really intense experience, the last thing you should do is make it special or dramatize it or create a story for yourself. It for me, it's just the real extraordinariness of what we do, I think, in the movement of spiritual inner awareness is just that the ordinary becomes very extraordinary and the extraordinary becomes very ordinary. And and at a certain point you go, oh, this awareness today. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, from the moment we read that first discourse, everything's been turned on its head. Everything on any given day, the rug could be pulled out from under us. And thank God, because if we got too comfortable, we might just want to stay here. So for me, that consciousness and that focus of service is often a healing component where I just say, look, Lord, if this helps me be a better commutator of your light and anchoring to this planet and this expression, I'm all in. If this allows me to more fully know that I'm God and activate that in those around me just by being there, I'm all in. And so for me, that service consciousness, it releases so much of the resistances inside of me because sometimes the suffering is really just resistance or blocking or but in those places where I feel like something's being, sometimes physically it can feel like you're splitting apart at a cellular level or something, or you're being microwaved. For me, it's that continual process of, Lord, what would you have me do? And then just watching what takes place. And during these time periods when there's spiritual transformation or even the ending of a karmic cycle, beginning of another, it can be very sensitive times. So it's important that we constantly challenge and repattern, because sometimes the frustration and the pain comes when we try to do the same thing we were doing yesterday, but our consciousness is in a different place. So it might be, oh wow, I really only feel like I can handle eating fruit today. So that's what I'm going to do. And then if the day after all of a sudden you need a giant T-bone steak, that's okay too. But it's like, how do you renew and constantly refresh your approach with all of this in loving and cooperation with your consciousness? And for me, when I go through these periods of convergence and transformation, the key is always, how do I remain storyless? How do I hold in a consciousness where I don't need to justify anything? I don't need a story about what this means. I don't need a, I mean, God, I would love to have a John Roger to write to. I mean, that's a strong preference. That would be nice. I would do that. But I also know that he raised me to ask that inside and to be that. And as easy as it is to heartache and to go, oh, I wish I had a John Roger here who could answer my crazy questions. There's also a John Roger in here who can answer my crazy questions. And sometimes the scariest idea for me is, what if John Roger's looking out my eyes all the time? It's like looking for your glasses when they're on your head. And I think that's true of all of us. And it's okay for the parts of us that are small and that fight for their existence. We should have love and compassion for them too. There's always perfection in God's expression, God's creation. Nothing is an accident, nothing is a mistake. Not a single part of your consciousness was not placed with care and great love and devotion. So I would laugh about it. I would wake up each day, you know. If you don't laugh about it, you might just cry about it. You might just start pitying yourself about it. But the truth is, most of what we go through that's like suffering or overwhelming or whatever in the spiritual level is something we prayed for a very long time. A lot of the things that I pitied myself about in my life, spirit spirit saw fit to show me that I did in fact pray for it, and then I felt real stupid. But then I was real careful not to judge myself because that creates its own problems. But I would say just be present with it and assume it's taken care of. And that if you really need to do something or need to occupy yourself with something useful, just search the levels of your consciousness that are in resistance or not cooperating with the process that's taking place. It's so easy for the mind and ego to assume that you're being afflicted with something versus this is a blessing. I just need to get the levels of my consciousness in cooperation with that. And it's why, we're on these subtle levels that seem really big. Every molehill is a mountain. And yet, I also have tremendous compassion for when people are on those first 2 years of discourses and all the karma hits and they have those first experiences when they've never had them on the other side or something. I mean, it can be, this is not for the faint of heart, what we do. And I think it's good for new people to know that, but to also know there's no greater treasure, no greater pearl of great price that I have found anywhere. So it's like if you're wondering if the punchline is that it was worth all the discomfort, it was worth all the discomfort. And it's always been the case, and it continues to be the case through each convergent experience that I go through. I think that's what I got, man. God bless you.
Glad, glad you're touchstone. I'm glad you're
Okay. I didn't hear all of that, but I got the energy. All right, Terry Joe.
Hi, Jeffrey. Thank you for this. I love you. Um, I'm kind of hesitant to ask this because I feel like you just explained everything I needed to know in those last two shares.
Okay.
But part of needs a little more, I don't know, specifics.
Okay.
I'm very aware that I have a really strong personality. And one of my prayers, I remember this very vividly when I was young, like very little. I was bored and I felt very lonely in my room. Like I was alone in my room because my brothers had each other.
Mhm.
And I was very bored and I felt very powerless. Like I had no say so in anything. My opinion didn't count. I didn't count. I didn't matter. And also part of the story is my mother died when I was very young. So part of what happened was I remember praying, saying, basically against that. Like I didn't want to be bored. I didn't want to feel lonely. I didn't want to feel powerless. So I would say today I feel overly connected, and I mean that to the world, like overly connected to people and situations and ways to be of service.
Mhm.
I'm stimulated very much in that department. I feel powerful in a lot of levels in terms of being able to handle my 10%, very, very good at that. Um, and then definitely not bored, like completely
Mhm.
overstimulated. The problem I'm having is there's a part of me that feels really proud of that. Like I survived through a lot of situations, through my resilience, my courage, my strength of heart, my curiosity. I'd say my two biggest things I love are three biggest things are people, service, and education. And it's hard for me to there's a part of me that's afraid to surrender. Like that's just the bottom line. I'm in DSS right now. I have class in a few minutes. DSS 1, I'm super excited. It feels very aligned. I've done USM and Insight and all of the things, but I still feel I'm at this threshold where I'm just not willing to dive in and like let spirit take over. Like there's a lack of trust or an over amount of pride. I don't know where I say I want to surrender 100% to God and let God lead me. But there's a part of me right here saying, no, we don't. Like very, very clear. We don't want to do that. And I'm wondering if you have any secret passageways.
Well, I don't know about secret passageways. I have stuff that works for me
Mhm.
and that you could maybe try out. So, firstly, I think it's very powerful to be honest. So, what you just did, where you said, no, I don't,
Mhm.
that starts the dialogue, and you can figure out who in your consciousness doesn't want that and why. And a lot of times, there's underneath that a deep sensitivity and a deep fear and a thinking that I had to be the one to create all of this.
Yeah.
See, for me, it doesn't work to play whack-a-mole with the constructs in my consciousness like that, or to try to do the clearing out there of like, oh, I did this, I did that. For me, it's always about who is the me that I'm pretending to be that I'm not. And the truth is, we don't have to give up the ego or the consciousness or whatever. We just have to understand what's really going on and really know that. And then that's the freedom, because it'd be kind of like if you spent your entire life thinking you were a self-driving car when really you're a driven car and you just forgot that you're the one driving the vehicle.
Mhm.
Does that mean you don't? So you have this Ferrari that you really, really like, and I don't know if you like Ferraris, but let's just pretend that you do.
Mhm.
So you're driving it it becomes a problem when you think you're the Ferrari versus you're just the one driving it.
Mm.
You kind of get what I'm saying? So you have it mocked up in your consciousness that you have to lose something in order to gain soul awareness.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I would challenge that. To me, there's only gain in soul awareness.
Mm. Mm.
And the interesting thing, what I've found is there are different levels of ego and consciousness that attempt to mock up and imitate the oneness and the fullness that you experience in soul consciousness. So, a
Yes.
big one for a lot of people is togetherness and belonging.
Mhm.
So, what they do is they create a sense of togetherness, but we don't realize that when we say togetherness, we're actually acknowledging separation,
Mm.
right? We have to mock up in our consciousness that there's something outside of me and something separate from me. And then we have to all hold hands and then we're together, right? It sounds great. It's like put it on a Hallmark card, right? But to me, that's a cheap imitation of the oneness that we experience when we truly surrender our consciousness into the ocean of love and mercy.
Mm.
I don't connect, I'm not connecting with you in inside of me. I'm just connecting with the you that is already God inside of me. I don't feel the separation.
Mm.
Like when Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. I always took that to mean he meant love your neighbor as part of you
Mm.
because there's no separation. And in soul consciousness, we don't see that separation. We may see separate expression within the field of cause and effect, right? Within the time and space field, we're going to see different expression, but that's just a celebration of God's creation and the completion of karma and all the beautiful things that were set up for us to learn.
Mm.
The closeness that you truly yearn for is a closeness that is so totally present in soul consciousness.
Mm.
And yet we settle for a kind of closeness that is mocked up and imitated by the personality level.
Mhm. Totally have seen
But
that.
yeah,
I mean, the mock-up.
but
I see how
of
clever it is.
course,
Yeah.
of course. But that's what it's set up. That's what got us here. That's what gets us in this cycle of transmigration. We're looking for love in all the strange places. We try to solve internal problems externally. We don't go to the source.
Yeah.
And when we start to realize there's really nothing to give up, your ego can still do all the beautiful personality karmas you have.
Mm.
Why wouldn't you use them?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you use that to your advantage? Why wouldn't you? I mean, some people come in with very awkward social karma and they get to learn from that and have the difficulty of that. Why wouldn't you use the charm that you have? There's the issue is over identifying with that and thinking that you're that versus thinking this is the car you're driving this lifetime.
Yeah. Totally. 100%.
And we think we have more control than we do. But it is very much like driving a car through a field of space-time where we're not the ones who paved the road, called the larger karmas in our life. So there is outer limits. There are forks in the road where you can choose that. So you do have a lot of choice and you can choose how you drive. You can choose how well you take care of the car. You can choose. There's so many areas of choice that are within your discretion.
Mhm.
And yet we have this illusion that somehow we paved the road in front of us
Mhm.
when it was always God's road.
Yeah. It's great. So great.
So you don't have to take your hands off the wheel. You don't have to not enjoy the ride.
Yeah.
All this is just remembering who's driving the car and what's the car and what's the driver.
Mm.
Your soul, your essential beingness, the truth of who you are is the entire ocean of love and mercy in a drop,
Mm.
not a drop in the ocean.
Mm.
There's no togetherness to find. There's only absolute beingness to claim. And it's in all of us as us.
Mm.
And yet it's all simultaneously fully inside of us. So for me, if I want connection with another person, I'm always going to start with them inside of me.
Mm.
I remember John Rogers saying in a seminar, he would ask people when he was kind of checking with them, how's JR inside of you?
Mm.
I might maybe there's people on the call who actually heard him say that to them. God, that would have been nice.
Mm.
But that's a very it's a very accurate description of relationship if you think about it.
Mm. Yeah.
That which you seek is fully available inside of you, and the full bounty of connection and loving and all the things that you seek are so fully available in soul consciousness. And it's not a contradiction. We have this crazy dichotomy of like body and spirit. And like, if I do things in the physical world, then I can't be holy. And if I do have a job where I make money, then I can't be spiritual. And it's like, it's, it's more like a render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's and unto God that which is God's. There doesn't need to be a contradiction there. You can just live a storyless existence, loving the one in front of you. And that's pure holiness, even if you're in a boardroom,
Mm.
or even if you're janitorial staff, or even if you're
Mm.
a beggar.
Yeah. Mm.
And there's no contradiction there. So I think to some extent, the resistance inside of yourself, you almost have it mocked up as like, well, if I take on that, then I have to let go of this.
Yeah.
It's not that you have to let go of this, it's
Yeah.
that you have to let go of your over identification with this
Yeah.
rather than you're enjoying working with this.
Yeah. Totally makes sense. Thank you. What a blessing
Uh,
you are. It really helps. And I'm going to listen to this again and again. Thank you.
God bless you. Um, Esther. Oh, I don't see you or hear you. You're still muted.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Great. Thank you, Jeffrey, for all you do. And
My pleasure.
I don't know that we've ever met on the physical level, but I do enjoy your presentations a whole lot when I make them, when I get to them. I'm coming with two questions. One is that I live a quite a nomadic life. And just now I'm back from 6 weeks on the East Coast and in Europe. And when I am doing those kinds of travels, I'm really, at least part of the time, I'm very conscious that I'm a minister. And for example, when I go into a cathedral, I almost always sit down and call in the light and bless those past, present, and future who have been there, and in other places too. And I also have the experience when I'm traveling of meeting a lot of angels, that is, people who come forward and protect me or guide me in some way. So the first question is, in living that kind of life and being someone who's in a lot of different places, is there something else I could do as a minister to use that experience, because I believe that that's a service, actually, to be in a lot of different places and as a minister. And I'm just wondering, I do try to remember to plant light columns. Is there something else that comes to your mind? And then my second question is that, and they might be related, although they might not. The second question is, in the last, say, year, I've been very drawn to what I will name as a different spiritual teacher. Obviously, I keep my MSIA affiliation and so on, but this person has a whole different vocabulary, which I find
Mhm.
kind of illuminating and so on. And at the same time, I feel a sense of like, am I betraying Am I betraying JR? Am I betraying the traveler consciousness? But I will say that and actually, there's two different spiritual paths that I kind of dabble in. Both of them have behind them major travelers from our traveler list. Okay, so I feel there's a protection in that. I'm working with somebody, another traveler through another teacher. But anyway, my the issue is I'd love to hear you talk about this question of am I betraying? Am I actually doing myself a disservice? Or am I serving my consciousness by expanding my understanding?
Wow, that's a lot. Um, so in terms of your first question, I think what you're talking about in terms of ministry sounds beautiful. For me, what really unlocked the experience of ministry 24/7 and being like, you could say a minute man, I think Jared talked about, um, was more zooming in than zooming out. Like you talked about kind of the story of it and like going to the places, and that all sounds great. And for me, what makes it ministry is a consciousness of service and a presence with the will of God. So to the extent that in each moment I'm saying, Lord, what would you have me do? I'm
Mhm,
in that consciousness of ministry. And to the extent that I'm present with and loving the one in front of me, I'm in ministry. So it becomes less about how that looks. And the one in front of me might be me. That's why spiritual exercises can be a great ministry, both to me and to the planet.
mhm, mhm,
So for me, I look at it and go, okay, it's going out into the world for sure. We know that, but it's very much that consciousness of unconditional service. And it's very much a presence. It's not, for me, about the story of what I'm doing or what it looks like. And then when it comes time to renew the ministry and you look back and you go, oh my God, who did all that?
mhm,
Because you're not aware. I feel like oftentimes the strongest ministry feels like a ministry that's not us doing it. It's the spirit acting through our arms and our legs and our hands. And it's just an action of allowing God to do through us. But for me, the greatest ministry is if I can hold my consciousness in authentic, unconditional loving with the person in front of me and be present to what God would have me do. I always somehow end up right where I need to be doing what I need to do to serve God. But there, Light Columns is a great ministry, but really I think there's a entering the unknown that becomes really fun where you just go, really, Lord, what would you have me do? And sometimes it's like, hey, go sit in this coffee shop and hold the light and just love the people in there. See, for me, yeah, ministry can be really big, but sometimes that's a function of a person's karma on the planet to do really big service. That's not what makes it a ministry. What makes it a ministry is the consciousness with which I bring and the sourcing to that line of Melchizedek that I do and that I allow to happen through the action. And I would also just look at reframing your story of like, I'm very transitory or I'm this or I'm that. I would just say, this is the karma I'm working right now and observe the learnings in that process or the completions in that process. As far as other spiritual teachers, I've never really found in the movement of spiritual inner awareness a kind of orthodoxy. And it's called, in a way, it interferes when it interferes. And there's a great section in the book series, Fulfilling Your Spiritual Promise, that talks about this. And there's plenty of materials about it. At the same time, just speaking to my experience, for me, I go read all these books and study all this stuff and learn, but it's always really this process of discovering that John Roger was there. So I'll read poetry of Kabir and I'll just go, oh my God, that's John Roger. Or it's like this this song by Glenn Campbell that I said at the beginning of the talk, that's Paul reading it and going, oh my God, that's John Roger, you know. But that's, for me, there's a singularity of focus in my consciousness. And I think it's important for us to also recognize there really is just one traveler. There's the traveler that expresses through a lot of different vehicles. And there's a way in which whenever we study with anyone, we try to disempower ourselves by saying, I like that person's terminology. I understand it in the mind, which can be an addiction. It can be a comfort level. For me, what makes the movement of spiritual inner awareness and soul transcendence and what we do unique in a sense is, the comprehension of it is not necessarily encouraged or required.
Mhm.
You don't need to know what the heck is going on. In fact, most of us don't know what the heck is going on most of the time. And I think a lot of people are nodding right now because that's just how it works. When we're working with stuff that makes sense, it means it can be contained by the mind. It means the God is probably a little too small. Or we're working with stuff that is confounding and it's very uncomfortable. I don't think there's inherently a bad or a wrong there's no sinning like we don't have that going. It's more like it interferes if it interferes inside of you. There is a way that if you take initiation or do other stuff, it can energetically interfere. I've seen that. So I can say from my firsthand experience, I've seen it interfere with people's ability to hold the energy of the initiation and the things that they do. Yeah, that can happen. But again, it's the same conversation I would have with somebody who really wants to do marijuana, but they have an initiation. I'd be like, look, there's nothing against marijuana in our church. It's not that it's wrong. It's that it's not energetically compatible with holding the energies that we hold. It's like there's no judgment on it. It's like physics. It just doesn't work. So for me, I don't think there's any inherent problem with looking into the teachings of another teacher or any of that other stuff. Lord knows I read a lot of books. I love hearing about I'm addicted to books and hearing about how other people experience God. I think it's wonderful. I love the way individual consciousnesses articulate their experience of God, whether it's you or whether it's Kabir or whether it's Guru Nanak or any of the other people I'm into, whether it's Meister Eckhart or man, I read all these people and it just explodes my heart. And I go, thank God they're there. Thank God there are people on the planet who are teaching these amazing things. I read some things by Ramana Maharshi and I just go, yeah, I love that. But I also cultivate a great discernment to go, hey, I'm going to be a snob about this. Like I can enjoy all that, but I'm not going to settle for it unless I have direct spiritual experience, direct mystical experience, and that I can tap into something that I know is the highest manifestation of God possible. And so for me, it's like, why do we do sound current initiation? Why do this? Because it works and because it taps us into something that's beyond anything else. And the tricky part is you could work with a great ascended master on the high mental or something, and you'd think that you were working with God. I mean, it's tough to discern, but the only way you're going to discern is by checking out inside of yourself. And there's no judgment, at least inside of me, about all that. And I think at the root of it, it's always what John Rogers said of like, use what works,
Mhm.
let go of what doesn't.
Mhm.
And my intention is always to have the wit to let go of what doesn't. And honestly, I've heard John Morton say this too. Like, if he found something better than what we're doing, he would go do that. So, in a sense, it's like, I think it's powerful that you have the integrity and the courage to even own that. So, my hat's off to you there. And then it goes, hey, look, maybe I have a karma to clear with this. So, I'm going to go do this and I'm going to trust. And then you just pray to God, please, God, correct this, shift this, reveal to me if this is not on track for me, for my soul's destiny, and for my path home to the heart of God. But all we can do is be honest with what we know and check things out. And that's the integrity of it. The integrity is, I don't know. I know that I like what I'm hearing and I know that it resonates. Oftentimes, I'll read the teachings of other teachers and things like that, because it'll give me a way to process and internalize and integrate something that JR had been saying for years and years and years. I remember I was studying in Danzan Ryu Jiu-Jitsu, and we would go to these like large conventions and groups with other dojos, and you'd learn from like other teachers from other states and things like that. And then you come back to your dojo and share about what you learned. And I would show the teacher, oh my God, I learned this amazing thing. I've never heard it from you before, blah, 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 blah. And then I would show her the technique, and she'd be like, oh yeah, the thing that I said this, and this every day for the last 6 months. And yeah, I mean, I just needed to hear it from that person's mouth. Now the ego is going to say, well, maybe that teacher's better than my teacher, but it's not about that. There's only one teacher. There's only one teacher, and that is the inner master that is inside of you. We externalize that in external forms. So we try to create that separation and one difference, but ultimately it's your discernment and your knowing. And if you need to hear it from somebody else in order to get what JR had been saying the whole time, I'm sure JR would be like, yeah, go for it. Go listen to them speak if it helps you internalize the teaching. Because ultimately, it's about your level of remembrance, your level of connectivity, your level of claiming your divinity in this presence. I would be, if I were in your shoes, I mean, I would be very, very conscientious about it. I would check things out. But that's how I am with everything. I mean, God, even when I go buy an electronic device, I'm going to be real careful and check it out. If I hear information from anybody about virtually anything, I check it out. It's probably infuriating for people, even people that I trust me and I trust them and we're super close and I know that they're very knowledgeable. I still check it out. Why? Because at the end of the day, all I have is my integrity and my authentic spiritual connection. When everything else gets taken away, it's what's really there that remains, what I can really demonstrate to myself and know that I have. That's why I continue to do the spiritual exercises over and over again, because I need to have my own experience. If I just sit up here and tell you information, it's not good for you, it's not good for me. So my suggestion is maintain the integrity, check it out, read the information that John Roger left because it's super useful and super good about it. And please don't judge yourself on any of it. Please just trust that God loves you more than you could possibly imagine. And
Thank you, Jeffrey. I absolutely know that. And I feel very affirmed by what you've just said. And we are all on such an exciting journey together. It's really a whole lot of fun. And it's so wonderful to have the forum in which we can ask and answer and listen and so on. Thank you ever so much.
all right, God bless you.
Thank you. And God bless you too. Bye-bye.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to go back to this retreat here and have a wonderful, blessed day. I love you. God bless you.
Thank
Peace
you.
be
Love
still.
you.